Yeah, I think we have a quorum. So, Melissa, you want to go down the roll call just to make sure?
Sure, I can do that now. I'll go down a list of members. Please indicate if you're present or serving as proxy if not already indicated. Matt Busby.
Present.
Thank you. Katie Proctor.
Present.
Thank you. Gina Montes.
Present.
Thank you. Roger Klingler.
Present.
Thank you. Gary Neese. Carrie Dyrek. Marcia Reed.
I'm present.
Thank you. Crystal Dykes.
Present.
Thank you. Benjamin Bitter.
Present.
Thank you. Grady Miller.
Present.
Thank you. Kathy Valenzuela.
Present.
Thank you. Rob Boer.
Present.
Thank you. Kevin Phelps.
Present.
Thank you. Jeff Kulaga. Bill Stevens. Bill. Reed Spalding. Nathan Steele. Chris Brady.
Here.
Thank you. Jill Kymack.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Tyne.
Present.
Thank you. Ed Zerker.
Here.
Thank you. Himanshu Patel. Himanshu Patel. John Cross.
Here.
Thank you. Scott Smith. Brad Lundahl.
Present.
Thank you. Mike Frazier.
Here.
Thank you. Andrew Ching.
Here.
Thank you. Reyes Madrano. Vince Lorfeis.
Present.
Thank you. Jeannie Blackman. And the chairwoman is present, so we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'll do the call to order. Good afternoon, everyone. Quorum is officially present and a virtual meeting of the MAG Management Committee is called to order. Please do remember to mute your phone when you are not speaking. Item number 2 is a call to the audience. Members of the public were asked to submit written comments related to this meeting through the MAG website. Comments may be sent at any time leading up to the meeting, but must be received at least 1 hour prior to the start time for the meeting. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. MAG staff have received any public comments? If so, please read them at this time.
Hi, Madam Chairwoman. We have not received any comment for this item or for any other item on the agenda.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 3, the Executive Director's Report. Eric Anderson will provide.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we go to the next slide, a few things of interest. One, I'm very pleased to report that our Luke Air Force Base Targeted Growth Management Plan received the Arizona American Planning Association Award for Best Regional General Comprehensive Plan. Very proud of that. Amy St. Peter, our Deputy Executive Director, is the one that really shepherded this project through with a lot of other help, but really so actually has been pointed as a national best practice. So very, very nice to receive that award recognition. Go to the next slide. So as you gathered, we've updated our public comment process. We've reinserted the formal public comment in all of our public meetings now. And as we just did, if we have received comments from the public 1 hour before the meeting, those will be read. We've limited the comments to about 400 words, which is about 3 minutes in length. And so we'll continue to have MAG staff and read those comments into the record if we receive any. Go to the next slide. So Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I think with the pandemic and the amount of people that are at home, working at home and all the stress, we have seen an increase in domestic violence cases in the region. So it's not, it's really important to recognize October is Domestic Violence Month. Our staff will be collecting information to put together an annual calendar of events. And we're also want that information by September 23rd if you could. So we'll be in touch with your staff on that. And obviously we want to light up buildings and other public structures with purple lights to celebrate or to raise the awareness of domestic violence next month. The final thing I have just announced, the next slide, just announced this week, 2020 Build Grant Awards. This is US DOT program. City of Phoenix was awarded almost $17.5 million for a very important project to improve the safety conditions along 35th Avenue from I-10 up to Camelback Road. Scope of the project includes pedestrian crossing beacons, the hawks out there. So there will be 3 of those, new LED lighting in the corridor, raised mediums, fiber optic, and upgraded signal systems too. And so congratulations, City of Phoenix, for that important project. Madam Chair, that completes my report.
Thank you. Please see Eric after the meeting. Give him a call, I suppose, if you have any questions regarding his report. So we'll go on to item number 4, approval of the consent agenda. Agenda items 4A through 4H are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the management committee have questions or would like a presentation on any of the consent agenda items?
Madam Chairman, Roger.
Yes, Roger.
Just want to clarify, we have a discussion on our legislative item on 4G, the policy. Is that correct? Maybe Eric or Nathan?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Mr. Klinger, we have this on for information this month. We're looking for your input, comments, suggestions to improve the policy principles. Nathan will be talking about this during the legislative update session today also. The plan is to bring back the revised document next month for formal approval, a recommendation for approval through Regional Council next month.
Okay, thank you. With that, Madam Chairman, I'd recommend approval unless there's other questions or comments.
Thank you, Roger. Do I have a second?
Second, from Grady Miller, Fountain Hills.
Okay, any discussion of the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Those in opposition? Anyone abstaining? Okay, I do need to ask Melissa to do a roll call vote, please.
Sure, I will call your name. Please indicate how you vote. Matt Busby.
Aye.
Thank you. Katie Proctor.
Aye.
Gina Montes.
Aye.
Roger Klingler.
Aye.
Gary Neese. Carrie Dyrick. Marcia Reed.
Aye.
Crystal Dykes.
Aye.
Ben Bitter.
Aye.
Grady Miller.
Aye.
Kathy Valenzuela.
Aye.
Rob Bohr.
Aye.
Kevin Phelps.
Aye.
Jeff Kulaga.
Aye.
Bill Stevens. Reed Spalding. Nathan Steele.
Aye.
Thank you. Chris Brady.
Aye.
Jill Kymek.
Aye.
Jeff Tyne.
Aye.
Ed Zerker.
Aye.
Himanshu Patel.
Aye.
John Cross.
Aye.
Scott Smith. Brad Lundahl.
Aye.
Mike Frazier.
Aye.
Andrew Ching.
Aye.
Reyes Madrano. Vince Lorfeis.
Aye.
Jeannie Blackman.
Aye.
And our chairwoman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Item number 5 will be introduced by MAG Transportation Planner Jason Stevens, who will be joined by Chase Wallman from Tempe.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the MAG Management Committee. I'm here to give an introduction on this item, which is Tempe's request for a second deferral for the Alameda project. There are several requirements that an agency must meet to be considered for a second deferral. The agency must explain the specific problems that were beyond the control of the agency. They must demonstrate a financial commitment. They must present the revised schedule and plan. And they must show that the previous cause for the first deferral has been addressed. These requirements were all met to the satisfaction of the Active Transportation Committee that recommended approval of this deferral. They were also met with satisfaction from the TRC, the Transportation Review Committee, who also recommended approval of the second deferral. So that's why we are here at Management Committee today, and I will happily turn this over to Chase Wallman for the City of Tempe, to provide you a presentation.
Great, thanks, Jason. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the MAG Management Committee. I'm Chase Wallman, Transportation Planner with the City of Tempe, and thanks for the opportunity today to present the City of Tempe's second deferral request for the Alameda Drive Bicycle and Pedestrian Streetscape Project. Next slide, please. Just to get everyone oriented where this project is within the City of Tempe, the project's located along Alameda Drive, which is a collector street in between Broadway Road and Southern Avenue. The project's western boundary is actually our border with the City of Phoenix at 48th Street, near the Tempe Diablo Spring Training Complex. As we continue east, we hit the I-10 and the future program pedestrian bridge as part of the I-10 Broadway curb project. Going east of that future program pedestrian bridge, we get into more of the commercial and industrial land uses, and that continues until we get to our Union Pacific Railroad right-of-way. And then east of there is when we transition to more of a residential land use. So our eastern boundary is at Rural Road. And the project's approximately 3 miles long, and is also part of Tempe's Bike Boulevard program. And that's a network of lower stress bicycle facilities that we place on lower traffic volume and lower speed streets, as well as our multi-use paths. So that's the image you see on the right there. Next slide, please. The project's significant to Tempe. It was originally identified in Tempe's general plan, as well as Tempe's transportation master plan. In addition, the map on the left is showing our bike facilities map. This is a significant gap in our east-west connectivity for the city. The project dissects a lot of north-south bicycle facilities that lead you into downtown Tempe, ASU, as well as the regional Rio Salado path in Tempe Town Lake area. But this is a significant missing gap we have for our east-west connectivity in the city to connect those employment centers and the recreational entertainment land uses to the residential area. In addition, we want to leverage the significant investment that ADOT will be making in that future programmed I-10 pedestrian bridge. Next slide, please. So this is our typical streetscape project for us. This is where we'll identify and improve some of the ADA deficiencies along the route, where we'll improve sidewalk ramps. In addition, it gives us an opportunity to improve the pedestrian environment by adding landscaping, doing traffic calming, slowing down the speeds on this corridor, as well as adding bicycle facilities and the opportunity to have a buffer in between the travel lanes. So the cross section for Alameda Drive varies greatly along those 3 miles, but this is showing a typical cross section of some of the improvements that we're proposing to make. Next slide, please. The project was originally awarded just over $1.5 million in transportation alternative federal funding. That was originally identified for fiscal year 2019 construction. We started our final design and our public outreach in January 2018. We requested our first deferral due to a water line break in the project area. So we didn't know at the time what the repercussions or the extent of that would be for our project. So that's why we moved it just a year at that time to understand what the repercussions were going to be from that water line break and the subsequent programming of that project into our CIP. So we did all our public outreach, refined our design, and are currently sitting at a 90% final design to date. Next slide, please. Which brings us to today's deferral request. So it was determined that due to that aging water line infrastructure, that the water line would need to be replaced. So it also gave us the opportunity to relocate the project or relocate that water line as well. Due to that significant cost, we needed an additional year in order to program that relocation of the water line into our CIP. In addition, we also experienced some coordination issues with Union Pacific, and this was a necessary diagnostic to understand what design improvements would be needed for our approved pedestrian crossing that you see at the railroad here. This is a picture of the existing condition. So we are just asking today for our second deferral of one more year. Since then, we've held that diagnostic and understand what the design is needed by Union Pacific, as well as have that future water line relocation programmed into our CIP budget. Next slide, please. The city remains committed to this project. We have reappropriated the necessary local match funding for construction of the project. In addition, as I said previously, we programmed that funding for the water line relocation. We also appropriated additional $200,000 for the Union Pacific Railroad crossing, as well as to leverage that investment from ADOT in the pedestrian bridge. We've also reappropriated funding for public art to be placed on that future pedestrian bridge connecting this Alameda Drive streetscape project. And as always, project management staff will be assigned through the completion of the project. Next slide, please. So that brings us to our next steps. With the second deferral, we would anticipate finishing construction this spring, and with eventual finishing the design this spring, with eventual construction beginning just after that, probably in late spring, early summer of 2021. And I thank you again for the opportunity to present Tempe's second deferral request and welcome any questions that this committee may have.
Thank you for that report. This item is on the agenda for action. Could I have a motion to recommend approval of the second deferral for the City of Tempe Alameda Drive Bicycle and Pedestrian Improvement Project, Rural Road to 48th Street?
I'll move approval to defer. This is Ed in Phoenix.
And a second?
Second by Chris Brady.
Okay, we have a motion from Ed Zerker and a second from Chris Brady. Is there any discussion of the motion? All right, with that, Melissa, I don't think we need to do a those in favor, those in opposition. Can we just move straight to the roll call?
Sure. I'll call your name. Please indicate how you vote. Matt Busby.
Aye.
Katie Proctor.
Aye.
Gina Montes.
Aye.
Roger Klingler. Roger. Marcia Reed.
Aye.
Crystal Dykes.
Aye.
Ben Bitter.
Aye.
Grady Miller.
Aye.
Kathy Valenzuela.
Aye.
Rob Bohr.
Aye.
Kevin Phelps.
Aye.
Jeff Kulaga.
Aye.
Nathan Steele.
Aye.
Chris Brady.
Aye.
Jill Kymack.
Aye.
Jeff Tyne.
Aye.
Ed Zerker.
Aye.
Himanshu Patel.
Aye.
John Cross.
Aye.
Scott Smith. Brad Lundahl.
Aye.
Mike Frazier.
Aye.
Andrew Ching.
Aye.
Vince Lorfeis.
Aye.
Jeannie Blackman.
Aye.
And Madam Chairwoman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Item number 6 is an update on the development of the MAG Strategic Safety Plan. MAG's Margaret Herrera will present the update.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the MAG Management Committee. I'm pleased to provide this update on the development of the MAG Strategic Transportation Plan. This item is on your agenda today for information and discussion. Next slide, please. To briefly review the work done during the earlier phases of the plan development, the recommended vision, goal, and action areas identified are shown here on the screen. The recommendations are a result of work associated with the Transportation Safety Stakeholders Group, as well as input from the Transportation Safety Committee. The first task included technical reviews, distribution of surveys, and public outreach. This step was important in setting an approach to development and implementation of the plan, and to emphasize the unique opportunity to demonstrate the value investment in safety in the MAG region. I include the peanut strip here as Schultz captures the biases the STSP goal seeks to recognize and address. Lucy and Linus's discussion gets to the core of some of the issues and barriers not traditionally addressed. Acknowledging these barriers and taking positive action will facilitate broader discussion and emphasize the responsibility of everyone to ensure their own safety and that of others. The areas of focus are data-driven and based on analysis of the MAG region crash data for the 10-year period of 2009 through 2018. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the STSP strategies and their associated opportunities in the next RTP. Next slide, please. So over 70 strategies are currently under development, and they will be addressing the MAG region safety issues as demonstrated through the identification of each action area. So for a more focused approach, strategies were placed in 3 categories with the intent to draw the connection between implementation of the Strategic Transportation Plan strategies as a framework for various elements and for the development of the next RTP. And I'll provide some key examples of each. Next slide, please. As the title indicates, several strategies are included to enhance how we identify locations for safety improvement. This can also mean other opportunities to use other data sources, as well as proactive approaches in identifying safety improvements that can be included in projects during the design phase. Implementation of these strategies can help inform work associated with defining regional priority projects. In addition, implementation will provide a framework for meaningful safety evaluation criteria for identification of regional priorities. Next slide, please. High-value countermeasures are strategies with the most potential for reducing the severity and number of people impacted by crashes and are easy and inexpensive to implement. So under the magnifying glass, you can see a sampling of these countermeasures included as strategies to be promoted in the STSP. This list can be further analyzed to develop a toolkit to help prioritize and leverage safety elements for consideration in regional priorities. This category of strategies is where we have a tremendous opportunity to be dynamic, flexible, and responsive, particularly in areas of future growth, as well as in the more built-out areas. Positive offset is underscored here to make an example of the 2017 MAG left turn mitigation study. This facilitated median improvements to increase sight distance for opposing left turn lanes at several locations in the region. A similar project could be done to focus on one or a grouping of these countermeasures to develop a catalog of needed safety improvement projects. These could be implemented with a continuation of the program funding for the MAG roadway safety program. Currently, the RSP or roadway safety program is only funded through fiscal year 2024. So just as a note before we move on, the FHWA and AASHTO resources are continually being updated with new analysis and research is done and it presents some new and enhanced countermeasures. So implementing these strategies can be flexible to these changes to the benefit of regional priorities. Next slide, please. What we communicate as the safety message is as important as how it's delivered. The first key strategy here is to implement the pedestrian and safety education and enforcement program developed as a subtask of the STSP update. Again here, use of other data sources already available to us can help communicate the safety issues may present without historical crash data and how the use of that data can facilitate a more proactive approach. Work done through implementation of these strategies can also establish safety education and enforcement as priority regional programs. Another opportunity with implementation is to develop communication materials that will address traditional challenges with leveraging safety implementations and encourage a shared language and understanding about the human interaction with the system. An example of the CNE Arizona templates, as well as other communication materials, are included in your agenda packet for this item. Next slide, please. So we still have a couple more months remaining to complete the development of strategies, as well as applying some planning costs and performance measures that will be key components to the implementation plan. We anticipate the draft Strategic Transportation Safety Plan to be complete in the December-January timeframe for recommendation of approval. First, I'd like to express our appreciation of member agency staff providing input to the plan, as well as those who will continue to participate in the CNE Arizona Task Force. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This completes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera. Do any members of the Management Committee have any questions? All right, this item is not on the agenda for action, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is the update on the development of a new regional transportation plan. Ms. Audra Kester-Thomas will provide this update.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon to members of Management Committee. Pleased to be back today to provide an update on the activities associated with the development of the next regional transportation plan. Provide an update highlighting the Management Committee work group meeting last week, where we had a robust conversation about a variety of policy questions, and then complete today's presentation featuring the needs catalog as well as the peer region analysis, both documents that were distributed at the beginning of the month. Next slide. Last week was another meeting of the Management Committee work group, a group established by Management Committee at the end of last year to roll up their sleeves, do a bit deeper dive on varying associated items with the development of the next regional transportation plan. At last week's meeting, there was a number of questions and conversations around 2 documents that were distributed last month at the direction of Management Committee. Those were 2 documents around policy question frameworks. The direction of Management Committee work group and chair, and working with the chairwoman, MAG worked to develop these 2 documents that really collate several policy questions that have come up in the last weeks and months, so that we can store some of those questions and use those documents throughout the process as reference, as well as discussion starters. I would characterize last week's work group meeting to largely center around several of those policy questions, and I'm going to do a bit of an overview of some of that discussion, but do invite the chairwoman and members of the work group to certainly provide their own observation from last week's meeting. We did also introduce and review the peer region analysis, as well as the needs catalog as well. Next slide. So as noted, the majority of last week's meeting was really open discussion and surrounded several of the policy questions contained within those frameworks. We started off highlighting transit roles and responsibilities, acknowledging the August memorandum that outlined MAG's planning and policy responsibilities associated with the development of the regional transportation plan and funding associated with the extension. We also acknowledge that we're working with Valley Metro to schedule or reschedule rather a presentation and joint session for the RTAG. We had actually planned on a joint presentation back in March, and at the onset of the pandemic, ultimately postponed that conversation. But in working with Valley Metro, are identifying an opportunity to do that joint presentation with RTAG, looking at the October or November timeframe. We had a robust conversation about maintenance and operations, not only historical context, the dramatic need, not only the projected $7 billion in deficit for the maintenance of our highways and freeways in Maricopa County, but about the same number of $7 billion of local roadway deficit for needed roadway investments. Acknowledging that HERF is the primary funding source for both freeway and local roadways, but also acknowledging, as we all know, that HERF is an outdated and insufficient funding source. I would characterize the majority of last week's conversation discussion amongst managers about the need to continue to consider preservation, the ongoing pressures, particularly at a local level, for maintenance and operations needs of roadways, in addition to the acknowledged need on our freeways and highways, quite frankly, statewide. That characterized most of our conversation last week. We touched on and talked about the legacy of the half-cent sales tax as a regionally focused investment, carrying regionally significant investments to fruition. We acknowledged and talked about the need not just to look at a continuation of a half-cent sales tax, but what else we could provide potentially with an expanded sales tax initiative, and what high priority projects and programs could additionally be funded with an additional revenue source. And then we concluded talking about the need to get public feedback on those final scenarios or key trade-off questions towards the end of this process, needing of focus groups and public engagement, as well as commitment to polling, ensuring that we're heading in the right direction for an ultimate and successful initiative. Before I move on to our presentation where we talk about the peer region analysis and ultimately the needs catalog, which is a key deliverable this month, I'll pause here, perhaps invite Eric to add any additional observations he would like, and then turn it over to the chairwoman or members of the work group if they would like to add any of their own observations.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, I would like to add just a couple of things. The maintenance and operations, I think, was a really good discussion, and you know, I think one of the aspects of that, obviously, maintenance and operations is on the table in this discussion because of the lack of any movement by the state to increase revenues flowing into the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund, which is a primary source of dollars for both highways as well as your local street systems in your jurisdictions. So one of the issues that I think is really important to understand, I've talked to some people in the business community, and they pointed out the fact that if the region does pick up more of the maintenance responsibilities, say, for example, we put a lot of money into highway maintenance or local street maintenance, it again takes the pressure off the state of having to deal with this issue. Much as when the region did Prop 300 back in the mid 80s, it took some of the pressure off the state of dealing with the real statewide funding issue. So once again, I think the political calculus that we're really going to be faced with, what should the region do relative to maintenance? And so that's the public policy question I think that's on the table. The legacy of the sales tax, I think, is also important. You know, when we did Prop 300, going back, so Prop 300 was the first part of a two-part ballot question on transportation. The strategy was to do the first part for a half cent for freeways, which successfully passed. And then that was to be followed up by another half cent vote for transit. That was the Valtrans vote that failed in 1989. And so even back in the 80s, there was recognition that we're likely to need more than a half cent to actually build out our transportation system here. We did Prop 400. A lot of the discussion was, what are we going to do now? We had to complete our freeway system. There were sections of the Santan and Red Mountain that were yet to be completed. Obviously, the 303 and the South Mountain had to be funded too. And so that really, I think, was a large part of the discussion when we put Prop 400 together. We're funding large-scale regional serving projects with both Prop 300 and Prop 400. Prop 400 does have an arterial street program in it, which is designed to provide funding for those important arterial streets that are so important for our regional mobility. And so one of the things that we're doing, much of the discussion today or in the work group meeting last week had to do with, the call for projects, the projects that the local jurisdictions submitted for consideration. And we'll be talking about that later in the presentation today. But there was, even at that, when we put Prop 400 together, there was discussion about a return to sender concept for at least a portion of the funding. There was actually a fairly robust discussion on that. And at the end of the day, it was determined, no, we're not going to do a return to sender. We need to have a plan that the voters can look at and evaluate and move forward on. And so the return to sender, where all or a portion of the regional tax proceeds would be provided back to local jurisdiction, was rejected. And in terms of sales tax rates, there was a lot of discussion about what the rate should be and also the term. There was a group who really said we ought to go for perpetual tax, a non-term tax. Some were saying if we go another 5 years in the tax, that gives us another $3 billion at the time. So once again, there was a lot of discussion on these issues. It actually occurred over a couple months, very detailed policy discussions at TPC and Regional Council also. I just wanted to provide that background. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to, make a statement and kind of remind this group that the creation of the manager work group was to have a smaller group of managers who were willing and able to, spend the time to dig deeper. And so, as Eric and Audra stated, I think we spent about 2 hours talking about these issues last week. But it's not intended, and we don't want it to take the place of the conversations happening within this group, because this is a group that's making the recommendations and moving items forward. We were hoping that the work group would be able to do some of the research and bring it to this group in a more consolidated, concise way. But again, right now is really the time that we should be spending as a group talking about some of these important issues. And so one of the things that we handed out after this meeting last month was a policy document. So as mentioned, it was about, I think, 18 pages. It was a joint effort between, some of the cities, I think my Intergov Jenna, we put together what we believed had been the outstanding issues, that we've been talking about for a year or more, but perhaps don't feel like we've been making much progress on. And some of it's timing. It's not the right time, but we wanted to at least have them identified, be able to create the framework for how we're going to go about, delving into those matters. And then MAG helped by adding the context. And so that created the 18-page document. If you haven't spent any time with it, I still encourage you to do so. The very last page is an index, and it might be good to start there if you don't want to read it from front to back. What we did at the last work group is we pulled out a couple of those policy issues to begin a deeper conversation. And as mentioned, one of them was this role, identifying the roles between Valley Metro and MAG. And it came up at this last meeting, and we spent some time talking about how we have different players at the table in each of those groups. And we do want to make sure, that Valley Metro, whether we call them a stakeholder or a partner, I think we agreed to call them a partner, that those words matter, and to create those opportunities for them to feel engaged as part of the process. Even though we have that fruit salad document that does specify the roles, we need to be, inclusive in our conversations. Maintenance and operations, I think the managers felt pretty strongly that if we are going to be with the sobering, perhaps reality of only a half cent, that maintenance and operations just don't give us any room to operate. And we're going through this exercise of these 1,300 projects that have been submitted. But again, the sobering reality is there's simply not a lot we can do if maintenance and operations are included. So I know at least the smaller group of managers felt like that was really something that we were interested in creating, perhaps even a position statement for consideration by the other MAG groups, as to, do we really want to come out perhaps strong now and say that, that is not something that we would like to see the tax spent on. So with that, I would like to open it up for conversation. If anyone who was in the conversation last week wants to add additional context, but truly hoping the entire body will spend a little bit of time talking about some of these important policy issues. So with that, I'm going to open it to the floor. Oh, come on, no crickets.
This is Jeff. I can start just to tee something up, just because I like to stir the pot. So, hey, thank you. I'd like to thank MAG staff, Julie, your folks as well, and you for kind of helping leading us through. Because you're right, these are really heavy issues that we will have to go through. I thought some of the interesting conversation was when we talked about, obviously Prop 400 has identified buckets of money that we used for our life cycle programs for the different modes. And I think one of the items we really wanted to identify was what is the baseline that is needed as we begin the scenarios that we are about to undertake. How much is going to be needed to support our existing transit operation, namely our fixed route ADA requirement, as well as our mass capacity transit? What is it going to take just to maintain the existing level of service? And I think that is going to be a critical number that is going to be needed so that if we're looking right off the top, if that's going to be a baseline that we need, we should be eyes open on that. So that was one of the conversations that I remember came out. Another, I think I like the way that Eric framed the return to sender as a great point about we need to be very thoughtful about a needs-based assessment on these projects. But we also need to recognize there needs to be a relative balance. And how do you score some of those criteria that were so important, like economic prosperity and mobility, which may not necessarily show itself right away. And so some of those conversations, I imagine we'd love to hear different perspectives from different folks.
Thank you. All right, maybe Audra, let's proceed through your presentation, but just for the group, please know that we really would love to have, I know it's hard virtually, but please feel free to jump in at any time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have considerable content here that will continue to offer opportunities to provide feedback or observations. So let's go to the next slide. And let's touch a little bit on the peer region analysis. We felt strongly about undertaking this effort, if anything, just to take a look at what our peers are doing, learn what they're doing, steal their good ideas, and avoid their own pitfalls. And so the peer region analysis was distributed at the beginning of the month, and I'm just going to hit a few highlights. Next slide. The peer region analysis really looked at varying characteristics of peer regions, regional transportation plans, the composition of regional transportation investments in different regions and where they put their funding in terms of regional investments, as well as some of the best practices that we could garner. We did do a really deep dive in the peer funding portfolios, better understanding what regions paid for, what was their responsibilities, and what they saw as their covenant investments. And then did a comparative revenue analysis to really benchmark our region against others. We also took some time to actually interview several of the peer regions, learn more about their plan development process, and especially how they've treated scenario planning and what were some of their key trade-off decisions that their policymakers wrestled with. Next slide. So here's a graphic assessment of those peers that we tackled. You'll notice the vast majority of them are west of the Mississippi, characterized by fast-growing metropolitan areas and those that have a lot of similarities to Western metropolitan areas. Next slide. So one of the things that was really eye-opening for us is that while we've taken a lot of pride in being one of the first regions to establish a dedicated half-cent sales tax to forward transportation investments, back in the 80s, our peers have taken that idea and expanded it. This is a slide demonstrating our relative per capita investment across funding sources. So not just a federal composition and state funding, but also the regional funding source. And you'll see MAG has, on a per capita basis, one of the smaller peer revenue in transportation investments. Next slide. We do go through and discretely articulate the types of revenue regions do utilize. When you look at regional or county taxes, here are a couple examples. You'll see a half-cent sales tax throughout our peers. But what you'll notice is that several of them now have stacked several half cents on top of each other, whether they're 20 or 25-year portfolios of projects, many stacking those half cents to maybe up to 2 cents of a sales tax. You'll see our friends in the Twin Cities, they have an underlying property tax of 1.6%. Next slide. As we've noted, we have been tracking initiatives. We are not the only region that is preparing to go to our voters to continue or expand transportation investments. We continue to monitor our peers who are preparing to go out, and what we wanted to do is provide just an opportunity of some of those updates today. Our friends in San Diego did go to the ballot a year or two ago, unsuccessfully expanding their sales tax, but their legislature gave their regional transit authority the opportunity to also initiate an opportunity for a ballot initiative. MTS had been preparing to go to a ballot this November for a half cent of a dedicated transit tax, but has made the decision just a month or two ago to postpone that initiative for now, in part citing the current pandemic. Next slide. The regional comparison in funding really exacerbates when we look and dial in on transit specifically. As you know, we have a half cent regional tax. A third of that half cent goes to transit in this region. When you look at our peers, it is common to see a full cent, if not more, dedicated to transit. Some individual, this is simply reflecting sales tax. Some of our peers also leverage other alternative taxes, such as income or property. I'll ask for you to hit return again. Our friends in Austin, which is Campo, you'll see they have a 1 cent sales tax for transit. They are proceeding with an initiative this November to expand into a property tax of 8.75% to further their transit investments of high capacity throughout the greater Austin area. So again, we continue to track these initiatives. Several are proceeding on the ballot, and we will provide updates as we move along. Next slide. So just a few summary highlights if you haven't had the chance to dig into the report. Again, we were at the forefront, but now have been passed by our peer regions in investments in transportation, and not just at a regional level, certainly at a state level. I would also make a note that Arizona is one of the only states in the country that doesn't have a dedicated funding source to support transit. As federal and state revenues either collapse or are reduced in size, more and more pressure will be placed at a regional level. And you see that with our peers as they continue to forward regional investments. Operations and maintenance is commonly funded across varying funding sources at our peers. But there are opportunities. We've identified a couple new revenue sources in terms of a kind of tax already. But one that was highlighted in our peer region analysis is the use of or investigation of potential public-private partnerships. Not something leveraged in this state or in this region, but certainly seen throughout the country as a successful way of furthering transportation investments. And then finally, certainly we received good feedback on how scenario planning and trade-off conversations ultimately help policymakers inform decisions. So again, before I move on to the next part of the presentation, I'll pause here. Perhaps Eric has a few comments he would like to make, and we'd certainly open it up to any other observations.
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you, Audra. You know, the first bullet on this chart really got my attention, and I've been kind of under a mistaken impression that the MAG region has continually invested more in transportation than our peer regions. And this is really a wake-up call because if you look, as you have a chance to go through the peer region report, look at what the investments are being made in public transportation in particular, as well as the other modes. And so once again, I think we really have to be cognizant of the long-term implications of underinvestment in transportation. I never thought I'd say that we're actually underinvesting in transportation in this region, but we are, given what our peers are doing. And obviously our economic development competitiveness, transportation is a key component of that, not just highways and roads, but also the public transportation system. So something we'll have to really pay attention to moving forward in the future. A couple of comments on the California experiences too. Referendums in California for taxes like what San Diego is doing requires a two-thirds supermajority to pass. And so it's a very, very difficult challenge in California, although they seem to be taxing people at a fairly high level. So something must be working. I'm not sure we want to follow that model necessarily. The last comment I'd make is on the P3 side. That's code talk for toll revenues. And Texas in particular, if you look at the regional funding on those charts and on the Texas MPOs, a large portion of that is toll revenue. And so, toll revenue, my friend John Holokowski says, it's a T word too, just like tax. And so, pay me here or pay me there. Somehow you have to increase investments in transportation. So I just wanted to share those observations. Thank you.
Right. Any questions, comments from the members on the peer region analysis?
Julie, this is John
Yes,
Cross.
thank you, John.
Hey, I had just a couple of questions. My compliments again to the MAG staff on this peer review analysis. It's really well done. I'm curious, in the research that was done, I wonder if you found any studies on correlating the public investment to private investment from an economic development standpoint. I'm just curious to see if there was any further work on that may have been done that might be, somewhat transferable to our region.
We've actually looked at, we've done some analysis on the change in full cash value of properties along freeway and light rail corridors here in this region. And so we need to package a little bit better. It's kind of techie at the moment, but I think it really shows, I think 80+% of the employment is within 2 miles of a highway or a light rail corridor. Big increases in full cash value of property, especially along the light rail corridors. So we're tracking this from 2000 to 2019. And so once again, I think the economic development, what I call transportation unlocks this trapped value in these corridors. Because without good access, you can't get to the property and the values are a lot less. And so we have that analysis and it's pretty clear that it makes a difference too. Yeah. And then if you look at the economic development criteria that corporate relocation experts use, transportation is typically number 1 or 2 up there in terms of infrastructure.
Right.
Also.
Julie, the other question, if I could, real quick, has to do with revenue projections. There's a very interesting figure in the report that showed the original revenue projections for Prop 400, and then what in reality has occurred by way of revenues. And I'm just not that I want to have a real technical answer, Audra or Eric, but I'm just wondering with respect to our, the next round of projections for whatever term we're going to be settling on with respect to the new program, how that is really formulated, and is there anything you're going to be reflecting back on with respect to the, the 2005, 2006 experience for projections for the next 20 years of the new program?
Madam Chairman, John, I think, yes, we've learned a lot of lessons since we put those projections together. We work with ADOT on the sales tax projections. They have a good model and a good process, and it's been vetted by the rating agencies too. And so ADOT, since they're the ones issuing the big dollar bonds, we really rely on them to make sure that the revenue numbers are accurate as they can be. What did us in, quite frankly, was the Great Recession, which we started to see runoff of revenues in mid 2007, actually. And we had 3 straight years of declines in sales tax revenues, where we saw our revenues go from 390 million to 290 million. That had never happened in Maricopa County. We'd never had a decrease in sales tax. And so, I've tracked downturns here in the Valley, looked at, the Prop 300 revenue numbers that had a lot of criticism in the 80s and the early 90s, and that resulted in this overhaul process that ADOT went through. So other than predicting when the next great recession might hit, I don't have a great answer for you on that one, or the pandemic, or what the next crisis might be. I'm not sure any of us. So I think probably the lesson is maintain flexibility. We talk about flexibility all the time now in the context of technology and the future, knowing where the real demand is going to be for transportation investments. And so maintaining some flexibility, not programming all the funds, we talked about that too. And so I think those are some of the strategies that building in more contingencies for these sorts of events might be beneficial moving forward.
Madam Chairwoman, if I might just add on to that too, on the federal funding side too, we rely heavily on federal funds to enable our historic half-cent sales tax investments. So we're not only working with the RAC panel and ensuring that those projections are tight, we're actually doing a deep analysis on the federal funding side, in part to illuminate some of the risks associated with uncertainty. We talk a lot about the next pandemic, or next recession, as Eric has indicated, but there's a lot of political uncertainty in Washington, D.C., or with the behaviors of drivers, or even what work-life balance looks like, and if we continue to work from home in a telecommuting circumstance. Those all have revenue outcomes as well. So, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Cross, I think we're intending to ensure that we leverage some of our key resources to provide a more thorough analysis, risk register, if you will, to bring that information to our policymakers. And we intend to start those conversations about revenue projections actually in October.
Thank you. If I could, when I was going through this report, and kind of what stands out for me is how much we're trying to do with the half cent. And I want to recognize that I think, our existing system probably stands above all those other systems that we're comparing to, even with less money. I think we've done a great job of, for the most part, of being able to, build our system, and people are happy with it. But when we look at, and I know this is, part of the framework for future conversations, but we're trying to do a lot with the half cent. We're trying to do capital projects. We're trying to do transit. We're trying to do maintenance and operations. Our arterials of regional significance. I mean, we're trying to do a lot with that money. And I do think that one of the valid conversations that eventually needs to happen is, is it one question? Is it 2 questions? Is it 3 questions? Do you start stacking, like we're seeing in some of those other regions? So, great information. Any other comments, questions on the pure region analysis? Okay, Audra, I think you have more.
That's a fantastic transition, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you so much. Next slide. We'll dig into the needs catalog now, which is an important milestone for us. We've worked this summer. If we can move to the next slide, please. Ultimately attempting to pull together all of your submissions and analysis of those submissions. So just wanted to pause here. David, are we having issues with advancing the slides? Excellent. Move on to the next slide, please. Sorry for that pause, everyone. Just to reorient ourselves to our performance-based evaluation process that we will be working through over the course of the next several months as we go from this very large needs catalog down to a fiscally constrained portfolio. You'll see here our key focus right now is in the composition of that catalog, which we distributed in draft form at the beginning of the month. But also, as promised, our first step in the process, our draft assessment of regional significance, or step 1. Next slide. So for the needs catalog, just a reminder of everyone, this compiles regionally studied needs over the course of the last 10 years or so. It does include deferred Proposition 400 projects that are unfunded or moved out of funded programs. And it does include your submissions as part of the RTP call for projects that was initiated at the beginning of the year at the request of Regional Council. We are ongoing coordination with ADOT and Valley Metro to ensure that the needs catalog does have and contains the composition of system needs. That coordination is ongoing, and any gaps that are identified by our partners at Valley Metro and ADOT will be included before we finalize the needs catalog. And then finally, just a request of you. I know you have all dug in since its distribution, but please review your submissions. Flag any edits that you might have for us. We went through, made sure the GIS was correct, flagged and worked with you if we saw a potential duplicate of a submission, but we may have missed some of them. And so we request your partnership this month in identifying or flagging any edits for our consideration. You can shoot those to us offline. Next slide. So again, a reminder, it wasn't just the composition of the needs catalog, but this step also we're applying the regional significance test. And as a reminder, that came in 2 forms. One, identifying regionally significant projects, those large capital infrastructure projects that would potentially comprise the next generation of freeway life cycle program or high capacity transit investments, those big arterial corridor projects, from potential programs where we would set aside funding for future investment. As you'll recall, this was an opportunity for us to acknowledge some varying differences across the region, diversity of where our development patterns exist. And so when you look at the programs, what you'll see in the needs catalog, it reflects existing Proposition 400 era programs. It also reflects, based on the submissions, potential expansion of those existing Proposition 400 era programs, as well as a bunch of new ideas for new programs that were submitted and asked to be considered. So again, just a couple of reminders. As the performance-based evaluation process continues and evolves, so will this part. Individual program categories may be increased into bigger buckets where we group several of these programs together, or we might very much narrow and specify a discrete kind of programmatic investment. Also, another note, while we'll continue this conversation about regionally supported programs to the end of this process, the actual policy definition and the development of those programs, if we can move forward again to a slide, are really that element of program implementation will come after the RTP as we move in later years and closer to 2026. Before I move to the next slide, I want to remind ourselves that our definition for a regionally significant program is one that is consistent with region's values and vision and achieves a unique or distinct priority shared across the region. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. So when we looked at the needs catalog and applied, I should say, our regional significance test, we found that approximately half of the submissions certainly meet that regional significant project definition, big freeway projects or high capacity transit projects. But there were a robust number of really important projects from your local agency's perspective that was offered for consideration. And so we took those 776 project submissions and attempted to find homes for them in about 40 categories, as you see depicted here. This is the cover memo of the needs catalog. And you'll see brief descriptions or definitions that articulate what each of these 40 buckets represents. You'll also notice on this slide that there's a bit of an asterisk on some of these programs. What that does is it represents that as an existing Prop 400 era program. So you'll see lots of support for our existing programs that we already have as Proposition 400, perhaps lesser known and certainly smaller in size than our 3 feature programs. But you'll see a tremendous number of new ideas submitted for programmatic consideration. Next slide. At Management Committee Workgroup, there was a request to further reduce or categorize, group these 40 kinds of project categories into smaller groups. And so we've done that. This is just another way of looking at these potential programs. You'll see a robust number of program submissions that came through on our bike and pedestrian focused, above and beyond projects identified in the recently accepted Regional Active Transportation Plan. Certainly continued support for our air quality programs, continued support for our planning work. Next slide. Robust number of roadway maintenance and operation programs you'll see listed here. Additional grouping of roadway capital programs. And then certainly, as we've expected, a number of kind of emerging technologies in addition to the investments we've already made in technology in this region. Next slide. As we've indicated before, we received a number and a robust amount of transit investments as part of the RTP call for projects. And back to Mr. Tynes' point, certainly an important conversation moving forward, just understanding what the baseline investment expected at the end of 2025 is as part of Proposition 400. But you see here highlighted a significant number of transit investments that we don't currently fund, but certainly are deemed important and significant. And I think it just underscores how much appetite there really is for transit across the region. And of course, continued investment in our safety programming. Next slide. We also wanted to take the opportunity to apply these different programs against the 6 goals, our framework, if you will, for the development of the Regional Transportation Plan. I recognize this is small font. We have 40 programs, so it's a lot to put on one slide. What this really is intended to demonstrate is how these programs each really do in one way, shape, or form help move us a little closer and help to fulfill some of those goals that we identified as part of the RTP development process. And you'll see in varying shapes and ways, these different programs help us move forward on varying goals. Next slide. So here we are at a crescendo of the presentation, which is our promise, as we indicated a month or so ago, that not only would we apply a regional significance definition, MAG would come back and offer a recommendation on, as part of this first step, which of these programs meet a regional significance definition. You know, to use Madam Chairwoman's words, you know, we are, and certainly the call for projects demonstrates a desire to stretch that half-cent a really far ways. And ultimately, we've already demonstrated we won't be able to do everything. And so as part of this first test, we wanted the opportunity to show and get reflection and direction this month on which programs are high priorities and meet that regional significance definition, and which ones are important, but perhaps take off the plate from further consideration as we move through this process. You'll see MAG's recommendation on the left side of the screen here, and I'll move through those here in just a moment. But I do want to just characterize these in a couple of different ways. One, you'll see our existing regional programs continuing, and MAG feels strongly that those are proven priorities and continued priorities for regional consideration. You'll also see, by and large, these are programmatic categories that are regional in nature, that they span regional investments and are regionally studied modes. Finally, there are some of these programs that are included simply because the robust amount of interest as part of the submission from the RTP call for projects. And I'll point a couple of those out as I go through this list. Again, active transportation, a robust number and considerable interest beyond just the active transportation plan, as well as active transportation barrier crossings. So these are bridges that would span freeways or dry riverbeds that otherwise provide barriers for our bicyclists and pedestrians. Continuation of ADA paratransit and air quality programs. Regional bus rapid transit. MAG is in the final stages in partnership with the city of Phoenix in a regional bus rapid transit study. We believe this regional mode is worth considering as we move into this next iteration of regional transportation plan. Commuter rail, again, a regional transportation mode that has been heavily studied at MAG, submitted as well by many member agencies. Emerging technology, already acknowledged the high interest in, set aside funding for those investments we don't maybe know what will exist into the future, but acknowledging our readiness as a region to respond when they do. Freeway management system, or FMS, again, maybe grouped with our emerging technologies program at the end of the day, but certainly an important investment this region has already made into that infrastructure. I'll come back to the two highlighted programs here in just a moment. Freight improvements, those are capital investments that span arterial and freeway. Intersection improvements, this is one of those regional programs that MAG is recommending, not only because of the robust number of submissions from member agencies as part of the call for projects, but we recognize that not only do we have capacity improvements at our key arterial intersections, but ITS or safety matters that really require the region's continued investment. We're recommending, in this case, an intersection improvement program be developed. Again, ITS, continuation of it. Local roadway turnbacks for roadways that ADOT owns, but could turn back if brought up to standard to local agencies. Continuation of regional bus and commuter bus investments, continued in traffic counts. Regional transit operations support. This is the bridge of work and in part that's done in partnership with City of Phoenix, as well as Valley Metro in supporting the transit operations from a regional perspective. Ride choice, again, with ADA, continuation of our safety programming, continuation of our transit asset management investments and expansion of those, continuation of transit planning, as well as TDM investments or transportation demand management, and then vulnerable populations, our 5310 program. These are the composition of programs MAG is at this point recommending move forward. I want to come back now to the two highlighted, freeway operations and maintenance and pavement preservation. These are highlighted in part because these are two programs that key funding source, as we identified at the beginning of today's presentation, is HERF. And although there was a really robust conversation at the management committee work group, at this point, we're seeking direction ultimately on whether these both carry forward or if neither carry forward. And I think this is one of those conversations we had a large amount of dialogue at last week, and would be looking forward to your feedback today. The programs on the right side are programs that we'd recommend not moving forward and be funded in another way. Not that they're not important, not that they're not important as part of a systems approach or at the local level, but in realizing that at some point we're gonna have to pull some things off and continue to refine this list to the highest priorities. This is MAG's recommendation at this point of the process. Madam Chairwoman, I have two slides to complete today's presentation, recognizing that this may be an area that we might want to come back to. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to complete my presentation and then open it up for full dialogue, if you don't mind.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Next slide. So again, we're seeking this month direction on these regionally significant programs. Which ones are regionally significant and should continue into the next step of evaluation? One thing I want to make sure to acknowledge, even if a program meets that regional significance test and moves forward to the next step, doesn't mean it's going to get funding or will be fully funded. The portfolio of projects is still fiscally unconstrained, as well as those programs, and it won't be fiscally constrained until the very end of this. This is simply the first opportunity to remove programs from our plate for consideration. And it should be noted that as we move through this process, programs will be further eliminated. We'll have to continue to refine down to our fiscally constrained portfolio. Programs may be narrowed or perhaps collapsed into bigger categories, or maybe even brought back after we get feedback from the public and stakeholders. And so it's important to remember that this is in fact iterative and not necessarily a final point in time. Next slide. And so as we look through September, just a reminder where we're at. There's a lot of material that was included in your agenda packet for today. As Chair Arundel has already mentioned, the 2 policy question frameworks were included. Those are for information. They're in draft format. We can continue to add to and evolve those documents as we move forward. The draft needs catalog was also included. That's for your review and feedback. Please work with us offline if you have any questions or any comments or deletions that you would like to make from it. But this month, we are seeking direction on what programs of those 40 that we've identified are regionally significant and should move forward into our evaluation process. Before we move back and talk about those potential regionally significant programs, I do want to note that our next work group meeting at the end of the month will focus on this initiation of a big conversation about regional transit, where we stand in terms of baseline operations moving forward, and what does transit policy and funding look like as we attempt to dive into a robust amount of need as it relates to transit. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, I'll turn it to Eric first, if he has any additional comments, and then perhaps we can open it up to conversation about regionally significant programs.
Thanks, Audra. Just a couple of quick points. I'm going to go back to what Jeff Tyne talked about, this baseline, and that's a scenario we're putting together right now in terms of, and that's what's required, what kind of funding, what funding levels are required to maintain our current commitments that we made in Prop.
Eric, first, if he has any additional comments, and then perhaps we can open it up.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So anyway, I go back to Jeff's comment. We're putting that baseline together, and that's going to give us an idea of how much of a future funding is tied up in existing commitments, largely our current transit operations, as well as landscape and litter pickup on our highways. And so assuming those 2 things are going to be continued. The other thing I think it's important that we start thinking, are there other kinds of revenue or funding sources for some of these programs that we might look at? And you'll note on the peer region that there are some regions that have, on the transit side, have moved into the property tax realm. So that was talked about when we put together I didn't put together Prop 300, but when Prop 300 was put together, property tax was the initial thought. And that was switched out to go with the sales tax. But, I think we need to be looking at, are there other ways we can fund some of this? Audra, we talked about the P3 models too. So again, I think we ought to have everything on the table at this point in time too. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, Audra, if you could go back 2 slides, that's the one we want to perhaps focus a few minutes at least of conversation, and I want to open it to the group for discussion. Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. I think I want to say again on this slide that the freeway maintenance is something that we really shouldn't be doing. I also had a question, I guess, Audra. Did you say that we could be coming back again on some of these if we don't adopt them now, or if we do adopt them now, we can change later?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Klingler, absolutely. As we move through this process, as we have all along, it's likely to be a couple steps forward and 1 back, continually adjusting as we move forward and have more inputs, public or otherwise, into the process.
One of the things that you mentioned and Julie mentioned, and maybe Jeff and John did, that we're really trying to find out how much all these things cost and what a 1 cent would do, or a ½ cent. And it's kind of hard to do that without that, but I think we've had enough information that we know we're just doing half of these is probably, more than a cent. And if you, and this is not, I know our community's been big on this too, but commuter rail seems like a big chunk of cost right on its own. And without knowing the cost of that right now, without the others, I'd just be wondering if that's really something that we need to start if we need to do all these other things. So, and then one more thing, I forgot what pavement preservation was. Is that the quiet pavement, or is that just fixing potholes, or what is that?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Klingler, the identified pavement preservation, that is just local pavement preservation. So arterials and street pavement preservation. Again, same funding source there as HERF. And I'll take the opportunity, since I have it, to note that commuter implementation over the course of a 25-year horizon is about a $3 billion investment, all in, including capital and operations.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
And I think commuter rail is an example of something that maybe there's a separate ballot question now or in the future for the commuter rail operation. So I don't know. These are things that are on the table. Not everything has to be funded by a sales tax. Maybe there are other ways of doing some of these things. That's another good example of that, because that's a real package of regional stuff that we don't have now. And so it's a big lift to get it off the ground. And so maybe it's better as a separate package. I don't know. Those are just thoughts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Madam Chair, this is Marcia.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Audra, for the presentation again today. I want to just echo a little bit of what Roger was saying around the freeway operations and maintenance. I know that that's a heavy topic. It's definitely needed, but I think we need to continue to work to try to ultimately lobby the state to take care of the freeways from an operation and maintenance standpoint in some form or fashion. I also have a question on bridge replacement and rehab. Is that intended to be off-system, on-system bridge replacement?
Madam Chairwoman, Ms. Reed, so that particular programmatic category, several member agencies submitted maybe set-asides for ongoing maintenance or minor adjustments to bridges along the way. Any discrete project that was submitted that's a bridge project has been identified as a regionally significant project to be evaluated as part of the arterial system, or if it was a freeway project, although not very many of those, identified as a freeway project. And so that particular category of bridge replacement and rehab recognizes several member agencies' submissions of kind of a set-aside fund source for local or bridge condition maintenance endeavors.
Okay. I guess my question, and you'll have to bring me up to speed. It's been a while since I dealt with this issue in the feds, but is there not federal dollars available for some of those things on off-system bridges? And how would that play into how this category is sitting out there at this point?
Madam Chairwoman, Ms. Reed, there is some funding, although most of that comes through the region formulatically. Preservation is an eligible source, and that's the composition of funding sources we use. Just like Prop 400, we have also considered the suite of federal funding available. So when we're talking about the extension, we're talking about these regionally significant programs, we're inclusive of the federal funding source that we have already identified. There are very few pots of isolated discretionary funding from a federal level.
Okay. So make sure I just understand you right, just because, I don't even think we have one of these projects. I'm just looking at it from a liability standpoint when it comes to bridges, that this is something minor that the local jurisdiction should be handling. Is that way I'm understanding that?
Madam Chair, Ms. Reed, that's how MAG is recommending it. So that's what that composition of investments include.
Okay, just when I saw replacement, that kind of worried me. Thank you.
Julie?
Yes, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to go back, and I think everybody keeps going back to the words of wisdom by Jeff. I really would endorse a very strong recommendation that for the next presentation we have, whether this group or the managers group, that baseline scenario has to be developed sooner than later, because otherwise we're working in a vacuum. We need to understand, because I think MagStaff's done some of this. I think you're just kind of reluctant to pull it out of the bag again. But I think if I went back to your old presentations, I could actually create it again. But I think I'm not sure what the reluctance is here. But I think going back to what everybody's talking about, we need to have, if we did nothing more to continue what is in place today, and the obligations we have under operations and maintenance today that are assumed on their current scenario, if those continued out into the future, not adding more, and then matching that up with your revenue, polish off your crystal ball. Listen, all these cities, this pandemic has been the best sales tax, that they've ever had, right? Where sales tax is actually doing pretty well, I think, from what I understand. So, not that that's going to continue forever. My point is that assumption saying, okay, even at the half cent, and Eric keeps saying this, there's a fraction left for anything new. And that's okay. And I think we need to know in our minds, we need to have that limitation. So when we're looking at this long list and you say commuter rail is X billions, we're like, well, that's not going to happen in a half. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't also say, at least from I'm giving you permission to adjust your estimates. I understand that. I do it all the time. But I think we need to say, what is the upper limit that we would ask for? Is it the 1 cent? And so what is that number, the difference between that high number and where the current baseline of commitments is, right? So we understand that differential, because I don't know that we need to put multiple items on the ballot, but at least we need to have multiple scenarios we can talk about as we consider, not just from a programmatic standpoint about what I want or what's necessary regionally, but the fiscal constraints, at least at that high level, I think need to start influencing the conversation. That's one recommendation. And then just a question, Audra, I'm trying to help me understand the difference between, I think I know what it is, but I just want to ask, regional transit operations on the left, but then you have light rail operations on the right not being recommended. So can you help me understand, is one what Prop 400 is funding and one is the local match, or what's the difference between those two?
Most certainly. So first, thank you for the permission to bring back our baseline costs. We'll be happy to bring those slides back. I know they're not necessarily always the most positive, but we will certainly bring that information back. We do believe it does provide good context, Mr. Brady. So in terms of the operations differences you see here in transit in particular, on the left side, regional bus is asterisked. We do have a baseline support in grid service. A couple down, you'll see regional transit operations support. That category is very unique to the system-wide baseline operations support that both Valley Metro as the system operator and City of Phoenix as a large system operator, but also the designated recipient, some of those regional characteristics of supporting operations of the system. On the right side, you'll see light rail operations identified. And this is a particular, and I think a really good conversation for the region to have. Light rail operations is wholly funded by the agencies for which that service traverses. So City of Phoenix, City of Tempe, and of course, Mr. Brady, as you know, City of Mesa. While that's a regional has been a regional capital investment, and the region has participated in delivering that capital investment, as part of Prop 400, the decision was that the local agencies would wholly fund operations of light rail. Member agencies did submit light rail operations as a consideration. We have continued the Prop 400 philosophy, if you will, and kept light rail operations over here in this to be considered to be dropped. But I think we're looking for direction on whether or not there's an opportunity, or does the region feel that that should come over into a continuation of a potentially regionally significant program. So that's open for discussion.
That's fair, Audra. So using that philosophy of trying to stick with the current themes of Prop 400, is what's on the left side that are there any items on that left side that are not consistent with Prop 400 principles or whatever guidance? I mean, I think pavement is, and I would continue to endorse that pavement. And I think the message, it's all in the messaging. It's not that pavement preservation isn't important. It just may not fit inside the half cent, the 3/4, or the 1 cent. It's not that it's not important. It just doesn't fall inside of the funding availability. But is there anything else over here? Because we've never, I guess, commuter rail, for example, that wasn't a Prop 400 project. And are there others on that left side that really we should say, listen, let's be consistent. If it's new to Prop 400, maybe it needs to go back to the right until we figure this all out.
So the simple answer, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Brady, is anything without an asterisk is a new regional program for consideration.
Without.
Correct. So you'll see at the bottom the denotion that if there's an asterisk.
Oh, now I see that. Okay.
Yeah. So for example, intersection improvements are not currently in 400, but you're recommending that they stay to the left.
I get it now. Thanks.
Certainly.
Other questions, comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Gina.
Yes, I had a question for Audra about on the right side, under circulator, and what the definition of that would be, and does it include those local routes that tie into the regional system or go across multiple cities, and what does that entail?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, Ms. Montez, it does not. So circulators are any either within a jurisdiction or sub-regional, crossing multiple jurisdictions that are not part of what we would consider the regional grid network. So with a number going east-west or north-south as the traditional anchor of the bus system network.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes, John.
Sorry, I don't want to belabor this beyond our time, but I just had a question. Maybe as Meg is coming back with the costs, as was mentioned, and maybe they've done this, I'm just not remembering, but has there been an itemized cost or an estimate for each of those programs on the left side so we could see what the difference might be between the asterisk programs and the non-asterisk ones?
Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Cross. So just a reminder that so far the needs catalog just comprises what was submitted or already identified. And so again, we have done estimates on most of these big ticket or big programmatic investments. And that's what we've constituted and demonstrated as that $60 billion worth of a deficit between known revenues and identified needs. I will indicate that one of the areas that we're continuing specifically to work with Valley Metro on is bus operations. We have a good understanding of some scenarios that we, again, it was referenced already, worked last fall to create in partnership with Phoenix and the Valley Metro. But I can tell you, based on the submissions we received from the call for projects, the amount of transit operations, new service, and interest is much larger than those submissions, or excuse me, those scenarios we developed last fall. So we're working with Valley Metro to better understand and kind of get an understanding what that nut looks like. For those of you who work in transit and have some familiarity, just after being able to map out some of those transit investments, those new alignments, that new bus service, circulator, and fixed route service that was submitted, excuse me, as part of the RTP call for projects, that increases the ADA paratransit service area by almost 50%. So, you know, for those of you who work in transit know how big of a nut that is, and the requirement to provide paratransit service, that is a tremendous amount of investment. And we're working with Valley Metro to better understand what those costs look like.
Anyone else? Audra, remind me. Oh, yes,
Madam
please.
Chair. Hi, yeah, this is Ed in Phoenix. I guess one of the conversations we need to have, and it looks like this list is starting to kind of get there, is, in the same way that we are trying to establish with the state that this tax is not a funding source for state responsibilities, we just also need to be clear that this tax is not a funding source for local responsibilities. And it looks like your list is trying to sort of start splitting out that way, which is good. I don't understand what local roadway turnbacks are, for example, and that's always the trick with bus operations, is what is regional and what is local. And so we just have to be mindful of that conversation as well.
Thank you, Ed. And Audra, I was going to ask, I mean, I know this is information only, I believe, for today. As we continue to dive into this, it occurs to me that if, this is the first attempt, and there seems to be, at least in the small group, a lot of hesitation to including the state obligations, to Ed's point, on the left, and they may end up there if there's no other choice. But it seems like if we wanted to start with a clean list of what should this be, that they really belong on the right. That they should not be assumed to be included. I'm with Gina on the circulators. I think that, the likelihood of doing a commuter bus, when we're in a transit desert in the Southwest Valley, I think that doing a regional circulator is probably just much more palatable financially, and something that may actually be possible and help that situation where, a commuter bus or something, much more pricey is not going to work. So I do appreciate the conversation. Do you want us to be sending you notes, Audra, as we're going through these as individual cities, or hold our comments and we get back together next month? Or how would you like additional feedback on the list?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of Management Committee. So we'll carry this conversation forward to our Transportation Policy Committee and Regional Council, and we'll characterize the feedback and discussion we had today, noting some of these observations, whether it's reticence to take on state responsibility and highlighting freeway operations and maintenance as an example, identifying commuter rail as a big ticket item, potentially one that's better served as a set aside, or perhaps just not the highest of priorities. But we'll communicate these items as we move forward. We'd encourage you to work in partnership with your policymakers, whoever sits on either TPC or, of course, Regional Council for you, will want and continue this conversation all the way forward, and hope to generate additional feedback. So we'll be looking and asking for direction all this month.
Is it up for action, Audra, in front of any of those groups, or is it information only as it makes its way through this month?
Madam Chairwoman, it's information only. Again, acknowledging a couple of the questions. This is going to be iterative. We're going to move a few steps forward and then make an adjustment as we move through. So each of these is a building piece, or a puzzle, if you will, or piece of a puzzle that we'll be building off of. No action this month.
Okay, thank you. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to move on to item number 8. Which is MAG Policy and Government Relations Director Nathan Pryor to give a legislative update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief in my notes. First, we are tracking census developments. By now, you've probably all heard that the Census Bureau has proposed wrapping up. In fact, they are wrapping up their field operations, moving up from end of October to the end of September. Our Regional Council Chair, Mayor Wires, has sent in a letter of concern via AMPO, NATO, and NARC to congressional leadership on this issue. Similarly, there's a court case where the Gila River Indian community is a plaintiff looking for those operations to continue until the originally proposed end of October date. We should have some indication from the court tomorrow on that, so we will keep apprised of that. Secondly, the FAST Act, the Federal Surface Transportation Authorization, is set to expire at the end of this month. This is shaping up to be a one-year extension. So adding to that conversation about federal programs and revenues as we continue to develop our own programming continues to be a challenge in terms of uncertainty. We'll continue to monitor this as well. And then lastly, to Mr. Klingler's point and Eric Anderson's response regarding the policy principles, that is in your packet today for consent, obviously. We continue to get feedback through the month of September, so please send that in to me or Eric Anderson. In the October timeframe, we are looking to bring this back to be heard at the policy committees, ultimately seeking approval from regional council at the end of October. We have had conversations with Maricopa County staff regarding the enabling legislation statement. Those conversations have been positive to date, and we will look to share more in the October timeframe. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. This item was on the agenda for information and discussion only. Are there any questions for Nathan from the membership? Okay, hearing none. Item number 9 is request for future agenda items. Do we have any requests by membership for a future agenda item? Okay, item number 10. Are there any announcements from the membership? Okay, hearing none. Business is now concluded and our meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.